Hola a todos. Hoy tenemos la suerte de tener con nosotros al profesor Charlie Lees de Edimburgo, Escocia, y nos va a dar su punto de vista sobre el uso de las nuevas tecnologías y la inteligencia artificial en nuestro día a día. Switch to English. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Lees. It's a great pleasure having you with us, and it's your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Diego. Thanks, Elena. Thanks, Danielle. Thanks, friends. So it's always a privilege to share my ideas and thoughts. And today I'm going to talk about a slightly different topic, but something that is really very pivotal to everything that we're doing in Edinburgh and with my group. And I've put together a new talk today to share with you some of my thinking around what I'm calling Emergent IBD Management, and thinking about the convergence of digital telemonitoring, AI, and smart technology, but actually more thinking about how we can now, in 2025, at a time where we have good drugs, good monitoring tools, good systems of care, but a bit of plateauing, a bit of stickiness. We're a bit stuck, I think, still in reactive crisis-driven healthcare. And I want to propose to you a new mode of proactive, frictionless, personalized care using new technology platforms and using the data that we've been generated to transform IBD care. And so I'm going to show you through the data we've been generating and the ideas that I have and the platform that we are building what this might look like. So here are my disclosures. Let's start at the beginning. So Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis are clearly highly heterogeneous, dynamic, and unpredictable. And perhaps most importantly for the patient, they last a lifetime. And so we're quite familiar now, I think, with the concept of periods of flare and remission, which is symptoms, but in the background, this progressive nature, particularly of Crohn's disease, but of ulcerative colitis too. If we map this out, we can go from the beginning of an IBD journey through diagnosis into periods of remission and flare and the evolution of disease. So let's strip this all the way back, because actually, really, we're kind of blind many parts of this journey. We don't really know or fully understand why someone gets IBD, although we're getting much closer to that through genetic, environmental, microbiome, and immunology studies in mouse and man, and in the lab. But still, we cannot predict who will get IBD and when. And when someone's got IBD, we're not very good at knowing who will go into remission and how and for how long, and who will flare and when, and then who will develop the complications of the disease over time. Moreover, we have to think on this scale about what are we measuring? Are we measuring symptoms, inflammation, quality of life, or something else? And over what time period? Is it days, weeks, months, years, or decades? Days are relevant, of course, if you have a patient on the ward with acute severe ulcerative colitis, where we monitor things day by day. We see the impact of steroids. We see now the impact of JAK inhibitors day by day making an impact. What about weeks? 8 weeks might, or 10 weeks might be your standard induction period for a randomized controlled trial. It might be your standard course of steroids or enteral nutrition, or perhaps soon a JAK inhibitor. Months? Well, 12 months would be your standard RCT maintenance phase. Most controlled data is in months, and months has a really meaningful impact on our patient. It might cover a pregnancy or a very important period of work or life or vacation. What about years? Well, we see long-term extension studies that go in years. We see epidemiological outcomes data in years, and this really covers major life periods for patients. A whole marriage, a whole child's development, school, university, for example. But actually, if we really think about this, for most of our patients, if they're diagnosed as teenagers or in their 20s, It's decades. And over decades, we have really sparse epidemiological data. We can't control for era effects. There's no drug data this long term. But this is the reality for our new patients diagnosed today. They might still have IBD. They will still have IBD unless we totally change our terminologies for 10, 20, 30, 50, 60, 70, 80 years. And so I think we need to think about this much more deeply than we have been until now. For our patients, sure, it's the physical aspects in the gut and outside the gut, the psychological aspects of getting IBD, the long-term complications of the disease and the fear of those, surgery, stomas, short gut, hospitalization. But it's also the everyday, unpleasant and intrusive symptoms, major disruption to everyday life activities, and a very significant disconnect, of course, between symptoms and inflammation, which is highlighted by the limitations of our existing monitoring strategies, which are invasive, they're unpleasant, they have a certain faff factor, and they're too infrequent to really be meaningful. So that's for our patients. For us as clinicians, we can think about it in terms of our therapeutic ceiling, that we're a bit stuck with how medicines are getting us to only so far. And it's a bit frustrating, isn't it? And we can think about ways to get through that, and we will today in terms of earlier diagnosis, stratification, better therapies, because our newer therapies are better. We are seeing head-to-head trials that show better. And new strategies, use the drugs earlier, etc. It makes a difference. So just turn all this round again. Let me just tell you what happens in Edinburgh now in 2025. We have a brilliant team. We have many doctors, great consultant colleagues, professors. We have surgeons, pathologists, radiologists, a great MDT. We've got 6 IBD nurses, 3 GI pharmacists, lots of administrators, pretty much all the drugs, more or less, with a few restrictions, to biosimilar world in Europe. All the monitoring tools, more or less, and they work pretty well. Yet we have 10,000 patients and we're largely stuck in reactive crisis-driven healthcare. Patients phone in when they have a flare and we react. That's typically what still happens. And sure, we see people regularly, but it doesn't really cut it. And all our solutions seem to require much more effort with more people and more money for actually only marginal gain. And we have to get better than this. We have to beat the status quo, the therapeutic ceiling, reactive care, variability in decision-making, and the administrative friction that steals clinician time from being good doctors. And if we take this globally, then, of course, we're seeing an explosion of IBD incidents in the developing world, across Latin America, where I've been this summer, across the Middle East, where I am now, across the Far East, and if we look across Africa, it's coming too. So we need really profoundly different solutions of care, I believe. There are opportunities. That's why I've put this talk together, to talk about these. Digital telemonitoring to enable frictionless monitoring, dynamic biomarker modeling to predict outcomes for patients. And I'm going to tell you the very cool stuff that my team of mathematicians are working on in the lab today. Smart technology, from wearables like I have my Whoop on here, to passively monitor physiology and maybe inflammation. And of course, AI, predictive AI, computer vision AI, and the sort of large language models that we are seeing in life and society more and more today. And I think AI at its most optimistic, I am an optimist, so I am going to give you an optimistic view, could be totally transformative for medicine, for life, and certainly for IBD in many different ways that I'm going to talk about today. But in all of these, we have a similar sort of infrastructure to learn and impute and then develop AI-based algorithms to improve care. We take input data, be it structured like labs or multiomics or biometrics, or unstructured data like medical imaging or colonoscopy or free text from the clinical notes. We may or may not annotate the data. We'll then put it into a machine learning environment with a training and then a test split, and then the models will learn and they will get better and better and better, we hope. And then ultimately we will end up with these kind of outputs. And for me, what this should be enabling for us in IBD is to go from measuring inflammation to predicting it and acting before patients feel it. So to me, this is building AI tools that enable truly transformative care and that work in the clinic. And I will propose a solution to you today. But first, let's cover the three major domains: predictive, computer vision, and large language models. So truly predictive AI is the kind of AI that we have seen for a while now. If you look at big supermarkets, big distribution hubs, like transport, like deliveries, DHL, weather systems, if you look at Amazon, for example, that knows how to plan and surge through different seasons and events. And for IBD, for me and for our team, this is fusing longitudinal biomarker data with PROs, medication information, passive signals from wearables, and then building this into healthcare systems to predict hard outcomes before the event. Not just to predict for prediction's sake, but to predict so that you can act and prevent the complications, be it flare, surgery, hospitalization, or non-IBD outcomes like heart attack. Inflammation over time increases your risk of heart attack, for example. We're going to come back to that. But first, let's just cover the other two major domains. Computer vision, we know in gastro because it's already mature, right? So we have the CADI systems for colonoscopy. It's real, it's regulated. GI Genius, for example, these polyp detection systems that are being used in colonoscopy. And you know, these systems do work. There are clear RCT data that show this. What about in IBD? Well, we can already use AI tools to automatically generate, for example, a Mayo score. And we can also generate a sort of robot or a Nancy score from histology. And that's pretty cool. And that will change probably trial reporting. But the key inflection point is when we go from just scoring to what happens next, which is, of course, the prognosis piece. This is where it gets very exciting, where we can extract all of the hidden prognostic information in those beautifully complex high-def colonoscopy images that we get, that we reduce down ultimately just to a granular Mayo score or maybe an SES-CD or whatever it is, but to actually extract that information. And then the third domain, so much excitement in this area. There are a couple of really practical areas just to focus on. One is thinking about how you can use large language models to help automate clinician workflows and documentation in a way that gives a major win, which is reclaimed clinician time, so that we're not just inputting data into systems and filing notes and focused on the admin, but we are actually able to go back to being caring, empathetic doctors, having meaningful conversations with our patients. So it's reclaimed clinician time to allow us to be doctors with the AI assisting, but all with human oversight. And you can look at how true AI integration into electronic medical records might, in different domains, improve diagnostics, provide quality assurance, facilitate administrative processes, provide enhanced safety and pharmacovigilance and tracking of disease activity. And then finally, in this area, actually the really exciting bit, which is where I think, my prediction is in the next few years, we'll start to see this in medicine. Take the Nobel Prize winning discovery of AlphaFold 2 and 3 from Demi Hassabis from Google DeepMind that's totally transformed biology from having to generate 3D protein structures painstakingly, manually, one by one, to having it all in a computer model that just totally transforms medicinal chemistry loops. And to think about whether or not similar breakthroughs can and will change how we are able to predict what will happen in IBD. So take one example here. This is, can you predict who will get IBD to prevent it? And there's a lot of interest in this. In Europe, there is the Inception trial, which takes first-degree relatives with a high blood panel risk, who are high risk with a near-term risk, and then gives them Vido to prevent them getting IBD. Will that work? Almost certainly, and there'll be a big splash. But to me, this is obvious and easy, relatively. The really hard thing is figuring out how the vast majority of people in the general population who don't have a first-degree relative, who have a modest blood panel risk, who are low or high risk but at distant time points, how you can identify those people. And this is where large language models might help. What do language models do? They predict what the next word should be. Or is it a man, chickenpox, common cold, asthma, heart attack, for example? And this is a simplistic example of how large language models work. And there was a brilliant paper that came out in Nature just a couple of weeks ago that demonstrated how actually you can apply this to UK Biobank data. And the example given on the top left is actually a patient that then develops pancreatic cancer. So it's effectively predicting the next disease event. And this kind of thing may transform IBD prediction in the future. This is clearly more than just promise now, but it will just, I think, take a bit more data and a bit more sophistication in the modeling till we get there. So we might be getting close to AI that actually changes IBD prediction, but actually it's much more straightforward to me in the short to medium term to think about what we can do in terms of changing IBD outcomes, because predicting IBD in the overall population doesn't necessarily give us a prevention strategy. But if we can predict IBD events in IBD patients and non-IBD events in IBD patients, that is game changing. And so I want to think about a clinical decision support tool that has inputs that come from the patient, from routine collected lab data, physiological data from wearables, finger prick blood samples that you could do remotely to give you a genomic score, metabolomics, proteomics, and stool for microbiome, with two major outputs. One is looking at a risk prediction and prevention of non-IBD and IBD outcomes, but the other is a service level stratification. So, we are introducing Sentinel, which stands for Smart Early Notification and Treatment Intelligence Network for Lothian. Lothian is where we have the Lothian IBD Registry. Lothian is the county in which Edinburgh sits. And the North Star for Sentinel in 2 years is that we will have predictable, personalised IBD care for every patient in NHS Lothian that is proactive and not crisis-driven. It's an EHR-adjacent clinical decision support and patient companion tool that will predict flare-related events up to a year in advance and recommend actionable next steps. We already have a working prototype, fully functional, that is based currently on IBD control, calprotectin, and CRP measurements, but this is just our minimal viable product that will enable us to get testing the systems of care and the IT infrastructure in the clinic from January. So why this and why now? Well, IBD affects over 10,000 people in Lothian, and we only have a population of just over 1 million. The data are fragmented at the point of care, which is endlessly frustrating for all clinicians. The clinics face capacity issues, there's variation in time to triage, and treatment optimization is sometimes far, far too slow. And so we are still stuck in this reactive system. So with the prevalence tracking towards 1% by 2028, with significant human cost and system strain, we believe that by implementing this, we can have rolling risk alerts that drive nurse-led triage. And so what happens is that rather than the nurses phoning 50 patients every day who've called in to report a problem, the nurses will flip at least half of that to proactively phoning the patients that the system has identified may develop a problem so that we can intervene before. And importantly, the actions and outcomes here are captured in a closed loop system with calibration, drift, and fairness monitoring. So the system improves over time, the whole system and the system for an individual patient. A word on what we're going to monitor in a minute, but first, just to think about one of the areas that we're going to shamelessly steal, because I've been thinking about for a long time, and Robert Hurton has now demonstrated that this works, which is that you can take data from a wearable, be it a smartwatch, a wristband, a ring, an Apple Watch, whatever it is, and look at your heart rate variability, how much variation there is in between each beat of your heart, and you want there to be a lot. If there's less, it signifies your body, your system is under strain, and your resting heart rate, and demonstrates that those two metrics can predict inflammatory flares up to several weeks in advance of the event. I'm not yet completely convinced about this. I challenge you to wear some kind of tracking device for a month and see what the biggest impact on your heart rate variability and resting heart rate is every morning. I guarantee the two biggest impacts will be drinking alcohol and doing major exercise. And I think either of those may overwhelm any soft IBD flag. And in IBD, we don't just want to be demonstrating that we can pick up people with rip-roaring acute colitis, because then they have bloody diarrhea and a high CRP. So Sentinel will input the track care data, the SkyScore data, which gives us the labs and endoscopy imaging and everything else. And the analytics model I will come to and talk you through in a minute. But our targets here in the pilot phase, early next year, is to increase the number of patients flare-free at 12 months, decrease bed days, decrease the time to treatment optimization by at least 50%, get over 80% daily active users, and save a minimum of £800 per patient year. And that's for low-cost patients. We think for an average high-cost patient, it'll be more like £2,500. So now I want to tell you the cool stuff. What powers this analytics engine? Well, I'll give you a clue. It's not symptoms, because symptoms are pretty rubbish at predicting what's going on in a patient. We know from the Ipsen cohort that symptoms are interesting and we can look at it, but actually, of course, we know there's a massive disconnect between symptoms and inflammation, which is why we measure the inflammation, why it's so much focus on mucosal healing and early treatment in IBD. So to get around this, we've been thinking about how we can actually look at inflammation over time in a much more mathematical way that will enable us to model the trends. So let me introduce you to a patient diagnosed with IBD 8 years ago with an initial data point that has a calprotectin for her at about the 900, the 800, 900 mark, you can see. Then starts on azathioprine, this is 8 years ago, does not great, calprotectin still high, starts infliximab, and then does great. Look at all this. And then you can guess that she's probably getting a secondary loss of response because the calpro is trending up. And you can see that this is a real patient in Edinburgh who was in our PREDICT study. You can see how many measurements we've got confirming the deep remission, the flares over time. Now imagine thousands of patients, all with their own trajectories. And you might just simplify things into a number of lines and then think, well, can we group patients, cluster them by their different behavior? And can we use some kind of mathematical model to do that? And the answer is yes. We use a technique called latent class mix modeling that allows you to look at this kind of mess where you've taken thousands of trajectories like this, simplified them, said what groups do they fall into, and say actually there's some groups like this, some groups like that, and some groups like this. And so we then apply this to very large data. In Edinburgh, where we've got a data set of 61,000 CalPro and over 200,000 CRP results and all phenotyping. In Denmark, where we have even larger data set with something like 200,000 CalPro measurements in the Danish population. And then we perform this big exercise. And we see with calprotectin in the Scottish data that it looks very interesting. This is real data. You see a group of patients here who do very well over time. The calpro is high and it goes low. This dotted line is 250 micrograms per gram for reference. You can look at patients who do okay, but a bit slower. You can look at patients who are more relapsing and remitting, and you can look at patients who are never doing well. And this is not us telling the machine, this is the machine just pulling this out. And we then replicated this very nicely in the Danish population, showing these clusters exist there. And then look at treatment. So for example, in the first group who do very well, we can see quite a lot of early therapy, particularly in Crohn's disease, kind of what you'd expect. And then in the group that does less well, there is still quite a lot of therapy, but you can see it's much slower. And we're trying to tease out now how much of this is disease just progressing, irrespective of treatment, and how much of this is actually just the treatment effect. But ultimately, we've done this for calprotectin and CRP. We've done this now for all the other lab markers like platelets and albumin, and we're using it to build on a population level a service level dashboard review that will give us a simple RAG report. So the core of this, where you will have your patients who are tracking along very nicely, thank you, in green, those who are at risk in yellow, and those who are in a major alert category in a red, so that the nurses can then call them. So that's clustering, and that's really interesting at a population level. But how does that help this patient? How does this help one patient to predict what will happen next? How could it help us maybe at this point? Would the machine be able to tell us at this point that this is going to happen, or that the patient's going to trend well, or early on here, or what treatment you could use, for example? And to do this, we need to move from clustering to individual patient dynamic prediction. And this is a complicated thing for which IBD is ideally suited. And building on the work that we've been doing, we want to propagate uncertainty around clustering to longitudinal prediction with the vision of this clinical prediction tool that guides treatment decision. And so we have the goal of dynamically adjusting survival models. It's a little bit technical for a bit. I can go into this later if you want. That fuses two components: modeling of longitudinal trajectories of the dynamic covariance, be it CalPro or CRP, and also looking at a survival model that incorporates the knowledge of the longitudinal trajectories. That's the clustering that we showed already. And there are two models you can do it statistically, and our team are working on this, but it's a landmarking based approach that fuses these two models that's never been done before, that's required whole new software packages to be generated, so that ultimately we can take, very simplistically here, the previous trends and the predictions to build within it a posterior class probability so that we can estimate survival, and do this again and again and again. What we're trying to do here is build a dynamic prediction tool that can take 3 calprotectins and make a prediction. You've got a 4th calprotectin now, let's make another prediction. You've got a 5th, let's update it, let's update it, let's update it, let's update it. And does it based on the data that we have routinely available. So we build a tool for clinicians and patients. But really importantly, the tool will work even if the patient never engages or the clinician never engages, because all it really needs at its core is a feed from the lab data to update itself dynamically. But what we want is patients to engage, and then we can input and make a really cool model with patient-reported outcome data. We can input the wearables, as I said. We can expand into multiomics and other research domains. For example, we can input the learnings from PREDICT, where we've seen that CalPro is strongly predictive, but also dietary input like high meat intake in UC, low physical activity in ulcerative colitis, and also depression increasing your risk of flare. So we can build meaningful environmental and psychological data into the prediction model, and think about how we can build an overarching system of care that will really work. But it's really important at this point. The whole tool will work even if you just input the lab data, and you don't have to wait to collect lots and lots and lots of PROs for it to be worthwhile, but it will work straight away with already the data that that patient has and will update as you go. We're building this, by the way, in English, of course, but with our big collaboration with Beatrice, we will build this soon in Spanish too. So I think this will be of great interest. So I think this is pretty cool. And we're investing all of our energies into making this a reality, with the first patients onboarded already in January, to try and tackle these key things that we're missing in IBD. The prediction questions: who will get quiescent versus aggressive disease? Can we predict complications of disease and therapy? What's the optimal drug for the right patient at the right time and the right dose? Can early disease control lead to sustained deep remission? And how do we build what makes an effective prediction tool? And this is the core of what we are doing to address what remains a very substantial unmet need for our patients in IBD in 2025. I just want to finish because we are, I think, with this strategy addressing equity of care, the therapeutic ceiling, frictionless and passive monitoring systems, stratification, holistic remission, and, as I said earlier on, this roadmap towards prevention and cure. But even if we do none of this, no fancy tools, no AI, no new drugs, no new monitoring tools, nothing. If all we do is do what we now know works well for everyone everywhere with IBD, we totally transform outcomes, because we know that the systems of care we use today, early therapy, expedient management of flares, treat to target, monitor and react on the results of the monitoring, we know it transforms disease outcome. But I think we can do better, and I hope that I've excited you by presenting a new system of care that we are building and that we will share with the world next year. This is the team working on it in Edinburgh. Few extra people here, including Alex and Victor and Elliot, who are working hard on all of this. Kata, who is the real brains behind all of the modeling, and Tina, Alex, and Marie, who are our brilliant collaborators in Denmark. Thanks very much. I would love to take some questions. Atomic IBD has been in a mini sabbatical phase, getting ready to roar back into life this autumn. So subscribe if you have not already.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Charlie, for being here with us this afternoon once again in our 5th edition of the TWIST project, and for your excellent and very inspiring lecture today. I have two first questions. I really am sorry about the first one. It's a team management question. How many physicians work with your 6 nurses?
So we're a total of about 10. If you include people who are working part-time and some academics who are mostly academic, we have there are 3 or 4 of us that do most of the IBD, but everyone does some, if that helps. So
okay.
but we look after the thing in the UK is you look after your population in the NHS. So, we look after everyone with IBD in Edinburgh. And, there's very small private work, and almost everyone in the private care with IBD comes into the NHS as well. So it's pretty much everyone that we look after with that system.
It's a quite different ratio between physicians and nurses here in Spain. Okay. And
but importantly, it's not been that case for a while. So we had 1.5 IBD nurses. That was it, 1.5 until about 6 years ago. So the big expansion has been more recent.
Okay. And the last one, what do you think is the key to a correct deployment of telemonitoring in the healthcare of inflammatory bowel disease nurses? If you have to choose just one brick, just one step of the ladder, which one do you choose?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. Can you say again?
Okay, if you have to choose just one gold standard key to deploy this system, this collect of big data to a telemonitoring system, which one will you choose?
So the
Solve
answer,
legal problems, solve
yeah.
ethic or software, hardware, perhaps?
So the barrier locally to get us off the ground will simply be the e-health team and the governance around getting a live feed of the data we want. Okay, that because we've already built the tool. We're building the analytics agent. We know how to do it. There are well-established regulatory frameworks to deploy for this. We don't have to make this up from scratch. We just follow the playbook. But what I have decided is that we make this not fully EHR embedded. We make it EHR adjacent because then it's highly portable. We then build a system, ideally, that will work anywhere. We're building it to fix our local pain points. We will then be able to have this test bed where we can test the models, where we can iterate, where they can learn. But we can then straightforwardly port it into a different language. We can switch modules on and off. We can add research components to collect data, etc. So I think it works really nicely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Elena, tienes la mano levantada.
Yes, thank you, Charlie. I'm really stunned for this talk that you have gave us. Thank you very much for making us to look at IBD in a different way than we do usually do. And I have a question for you. Do you think it will come the time for these tools to help us for therapy selection for each patient? Do you think this will help us, which will be the optimal therapy for each of our patients?
So thanks for the nice words, Elena. It's a good question. It's both a bit harder and it slightly doesn't matter. Based on what we currently know now, right? Everything I think that we've learned in the last 5 years, as we've got more and more therapies, tells us to a greater or lesser extent which therapy you start matters less about when you start a therapy and just starting an effective therapy, right? And we lack this predictive model for therapy selection. Will our tool help further optimize when you start a therapy and for what patient? Yes, absolutely. And I think it will really help, particularly in ulcerative colitis, because in Crohn's disease, we largely know the time is early, although there are, I think, at a population level, anywhere up to a third of patients who don't need advanced therapy at the start. If you're truly population, and in those patients, this will help. In ulcerative colitis, I don't think we've got the answer yet to when the right time to start advanced therapy is. It's not like Crohn's, and I think we're treating overall too many people too late, but there is a trend to treating a bit earlier in some cases than we might. And treatment optimization, it will help with moving people on, etc. The answer to which therapy for which patient, I think probably still needs to come from biology. And apart from the sort of softer things that we know about, like, extraintestinal manifestations and comorbidities and, tablets versus subcut, whatever. But the true biology, I think, needs to still come from the biologists and the mucosal immunologists. But the model of care we build will provide a system where we can then test new biomarkers when they come. Profile was brilliant, right? But let's not forget, it was a negative biomarker stratified trial for a biomarker that was originally discovered 15 plus years ago that took all that time and development to find it doesn't work. And so with Sentinel, I hope that what we do is we build a tool where we can then plug and play things when they become obvious elsewhere, and do sort of user testing to show their impact as well, to shorten the time to translation.
Charlie, thank you very much for your talk. Maybe have some more minutes. I was wondering, well, I have a lot of questions on a row, but let me ask you at least one of those. If I understood well regarding your system, the program you're working in, the Sentinel, is it true that it's the main issue, the main topic, it would be stronger in predicting who will develop IBD rather than monitoring or getting ahead of who will develop a new flare or something like that? Is it getting well?
No, we're building this for IBD patients who have IBD already. Because to predict who's going to get IBD, you need to deploy it across the whole population, right? It's a really, really difficult problem. And I think it's been simplified and slightly trivialized, as I mentioned, by the focus on first-degree relatives with a short near-term risk. Whereas we fully know in the clinic that 90+% of our patients come to us with no family history. They're in that just sort of general population thing. So this is about, the idea here is that the vast majority of people at the start will be your prevalent patients. And when you onboard them onto Sentinel, you will already have available to you, based on the routinely collected lab data, CRP, CalPro, blood count, albumin, and whatever phenotypic data you have already, clear trajectories up until now, and then with the prediction of what happens forwards, and then the prediction of events as we go. We will at the same time build a sort of diagnostic mode, or sort of new patient mode rather, so that there will be, you will have a new patient with IBD, you'll input them into the system with everything you've currently got, including their pre-diagnostic information. We know from the brilliant work that Marie Vestergaard did with James Lee, where they showed that, you know, there are abnormalities in routine labs going back 5 years before a diagnosis of Crohn's disease. So you feed that in, you then start the model with whatever omic data is there. So no, this is geared towards IBD patients, predicting IBD and non-IBD outcomes. But I believe that once we have this for IBD, we can translate it out to other chronic conditions, particularly other immune-mediated inflammatory diseases, such as rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, for example. Maybe also MS and diabetes. We can help teach them how to do their job.
And it will provide you sort of a population dashboard to get your
yes.
the patient's population control to pick up who's at risk of developing a bad situation, correct. Something like it. Is that correct?
Two modes, right? The population mode, where, you know, it might be that the IBD nurses or you look at it every day. The idea is that you start by keeping that red group really small, so you don't overwhelm the system. You don't suddenly give the nurses 500 patients that need to be phoned because the system's flagged it. You just pull up the 10 or 20, maybe it's 5 each day who are at the highest risk. And you know who's in the green group, that's fine. And then the amber grouping, you're maybe just checking that the patient has an appointment with me within the next 2 or 3 months, for example. So some of it will be systematic. So that's the mode that we can switch on quite easily based on the clustering. And then the individual patient mode, which is the dynamic prediction tool with a patient companion app, so that patient and clinician will be able to look at the same truth of their journey over time. And we'll need to figure out things like how you enrich and update all the phenotyping data that becomes available over time, and probably there'll be different systems to do that. But as I mentioned, we're building it as in a way that the core engine doesn't rely on the extra bits to actually work at the start.
And when do you think we'll be ready for prime time?
So we're aiming to push out a pilot starting in January. I get accused of being a bit like Elon Musk, saying we'll have rockets on Mars by Christmas. But if we can get past the e-health restrictions, I'm optimistic that we might be able to get going then, because actually, you know, the tool works. So if you can go from an idea plus a tool to demonstrating that you've got some patients already using the system in the clinic, then I think that shows, you know, those are the key initial steps. And from there, it's all just building and iterating and learning.
Right. Sounds awesome, actually. Can't wait to see it.
Yeah, and we'll build it in Spanish too.
Please tell us.
Yeah.
Please tell us. I don't know if there's any question for you, audience. ¿Alguna otra pregunta de
Yes,
Elena?
can I ask you another question, Charlie?
Sure.
Do you think there's a possibility that the patients get obsessed with this super control of their disease?
Yeah. So
maybe it's a stupid question, but you
So-
know that our patients are kind of sometimes obsessed with their symptoms and
yeah,
their physics and their abdominal pain and everything.
and I think you might be able to help those patients more, right? Because you might be able to, you know, the system might be able to pick up those patients. It might be then able to do some hyper-personalized signposting to some cognitive behavioral therapy or another module that would help them, you know, cope with that. I mean, this kind of concern has been there throughout for any kind of data system or tool for health, and I think those concerns need to be considered. Important for all of this that you just involve patients at every step of the way, and that you know. So we've already started our consultation phase across clinicians, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, administrators, and the managers in the hospital. And our immediate next phase, hopefully within the next couple of weeks, is to start a series of patient focus groups so that we're co-creating the system and we're looking out for these kinds of problems. So yes, I agree, it's a potential problem, but I suspect in the scheme of things, it's not so much. And my dream ultimately is that you're building a tool that is passive and frictionless. So actually, patients can just get on with their lives. And hopefully some of the passive inputs are sensitive enough ultimately that, you know, patients getting on with their lives, then at some point the system flags up and says, yeah, it's not quite so good at the moment. Let's just get a CalPro done, or let's times check in with your IBD team, rather than we need to see you every month, we need to do this or that or whatever. So that's kind of where I want to get to. But we don't have all these tools yet, so we'll just use what we currently have.
Okay, thank you.
So this system would provide you more time for those patients who really need your time, rather than a little piece of your time for everybody. No, that's the key, right?
I think so. That is I think that's a lot of the key, particularly if you can then start to use AI tools to decrease administrative overload and burden, so that we can just spend time being with our patients and actually.
Maybe another stupid question. Do you think this system, once you develop and it's running, do you think it would apply to any other population? I mean, your population is more multi-ethnic than our population, probably,
I think it should work for all populations, and actually, I'm quite optimistic about it as being a way of allowing parts of the world which don't have so much healthcare resource and where there is not so much infrastructure already to be able to immediately leapfrog and implement a system of care that allows them to be state of the art effectively already, because the inputs are simple. And software's eminently scalable.
Well, it sounds great. I mean, I will stay tuned to see your progress about that.
Well, thank you. Great conversation today.
Thank you. We know that you have to leave. You're in such a hurry.
¿Hay alguna pregunta más en la audiencia? Porque si no, efectivamente tenemos que ser puntuales con el doctor Liss, que tiene que salir en 7 minutos. No veo ninguna cosa en el chat. So, Charlie, thank you very much for your participation today, for your excellent presentation, for sharing your Sentinel concept and your team's perspective in the topic. And all the questions are solved today, but not tomorrow. So see you next time at another twist. Thank you very much.
Well, actually, we will see each other on December 4th in Madrid.
Yes.
Will you?
Perfect.
See you soon.
Look forward to it. Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Y gracias a todos por participar en esta primera fase del twist. Ahora nos quedaríamos en local para comentar la jugada. Yago, ¿qué opinas? Él ha dicho que es muy optimista. Yo creo que es muy optimista.
A mí me parece, a ver, desde el punto de vista de todo lo que cuenta este hombre, tiene todo sentido. Otra cosa es que realmente se pueda desarrollar y se pueda hacer. El tipo cuenta con un equipo bárbaro de gente y matemáticos y la leche.
Claro.
Pues seguro que es capaz de darnos. A lo mejor siempre he pensado que de todos los pacientes que ves y que revisas, hay muchos que no había que hacerlos. Y esos son los que digo, pues usted por email, usted por correo, usted, pues si tengo una base de inteligencia artificial que me lo selecciona mucho mejor, pues de cine.
Puedes dirigir
tengo para mí
que
justo esa es la filosofía de todo. Yo soy muy creyente de esto, pero tengo para mí que por mucha inteligencia artificial que le hagas y muchos datos que le pongas, al final vas a decir, pues de los 500 que tal, hay que ponerle el foco a 220. Coño, pues para eso. Pero bueno, habrá que verlo. Yo para mí tiene todo el sentido, no sé cómo lo veis los demás.
Yo soy muy escéptico. A mí me pasa, y recuerdo una frase de Luis Menchen, que es, en mi cabeza el plan no tenía fisuras. Cuando esto lo aplicas al día a día, cuestiones legales, cuestiones profesionales, cuestiones de la informática del hospital, la conexión entre todo este conjunto de dispositivos, desde anillos, pulseras, relojes, monitorización un poco más clásica, llamadas telefónicas, con historia clínica electrónica, en este momento hay un gap brutal, y no tanto por la capacidad de la historia de recoger los datos de una manera parametrizada y ordenada, como porque los informáticos, los sistemas y los informáticos no están preparados para empezar a pulsar todos estos datos que de manera prospectiva sean capaces de decirnos, mira, este paciente en diciembre se va a poner malo y te lo estoy diciendo ya en julio.
Seguramente tengas razón, pero hace ya bastantes años yo escuché una charla de un tipo que se dedicaba a la atención primaria en el área de Valencia, si no recuerdo yo mal, en un área de Valencia, y él era capaz de saber, con todas las analíticas tal, se dedicaba a la diabetes y era capaz de saber qué diabéticos estaban mal controlados, quién estaba en riesgo, quién necesitaba más control de la insulina, quién tal, qué centro de salud lo estaba haciendo peor, en dónde hacía falta una enfermera para decir. Cogía ya, te estoy hablando hace 10 años, ya el tipo manejaba lo que hoy llamaríamos Big Data, de todos los análisis, de las glucemias, de todo el área, ¿no? Pero estoy de acuerdo contigo
Te
en
compro el
que
argumento, pero solo en parte. Y te explico por qué. Porque por muy compleja que pueda ser la diabetes, tú tienes 10 o 12 parámetros analíticos y unos cuantos parámetros clínicos y ya la tienes razonablemente monitorizada. Yo creo que la extrapolación no es aplicable al 100%. El concepto sí, por supuesto, pero
bueno,
la
pero
sencillez
estoy
de la
hablando hace
diabetes.
un montón de años, que chico, no sé.
Fíjate,
Y luego sí que...
¿viste la diapositiva que decía que si comían más carne, predecía que iban
Sí,
a...
sí, sí.
O sea, esto es
Pero si
una
es que
cosa...
en Edimburgo no se come otra cosa, que se come en Edimburgo, no se come otra cosa. Entonces está en Edimburgo, o comes carne o no comes nada.
Sí, o una oveja.
Por eso, no sé. El caso es que sí que te compro que los sistemas informáticos de nuestro medio probablemente sean diferentes que los de su medio. Y yo no soy capaz de bajarme el correo corporativo en el teléfono móvil, es imposible. Es como para que un paciente mío meta la calprotectina, vamos.
Yo no soy capaz de abrir el correo corporativo dentro de los sistemas del gobierno de Canarias. O sea, que ya imagínate el móvil. Bueno,
Bueno,
Pablo, Susana, Patricia, había otra compañera más. ¿Alguna reflexión, alguna pregunta o alguna experiencia de dificultades o de experiencias exitosas que tengáis en vuestros hospitales?
Hola chicos, buenas tardes.
buenas
Hola,
tardes.
Susana.
Bueno, escuchar a Charlie Lee a mí siempre me parece que es un regalo, la verdad.
Mm,
A ver, yo, mi aportación es una reflexión en voz alta. Experiencia de este tipo de sistemas no tengo ninguno. No os voy a decir el número de enfermeras que tengo porque me da vergüenza, pero es verdad que venimos escuchando estas charlas del futuro, de lo vamos a predecir, de vamos a saber a quién ponerle esto, a quién lo otro. Llevamos escuchando a Severin Vermier dar la última charla State of Art con este tema siglos, pero por lo menos el Sentinel empieza en enero. Ya me
mm.
parece un éxito. No sé qué conseguirán con ello, pero oye, por lo menos tienen un proyecto con un cronograma que
Bueno, pues
empieza en enero.
a lo mejor echan a andar con un poquito y van viendo, y lo bueno de la inteligencia
Bueno,
artificial es que aprende de sí misma y te va diciendo, y luego lo que dice, cuando ya tenga todo esto organizado, vendrá un tío nuevo y ya sabré desde el primer momento cómo lo tengo que monitorizar, qué posibilidades tiene de ir mal, que no sé qué, ¿no?
por eso digo que ya me parece que es muy meritorio que un proyecto de más o menos intentar adelantarnos al futuro con ayudándonos de inteligencia artificial, pues tenga una fecha de inicio. La verdad es que a mí me gusta pues ver que estas cosas empiezan a funcionar y bueno, ya nos contarán qué van
Te,
consiguiendo, ¿no?
te
En
voy a decir
alguna
que a mí,
parte del mundo funcionan.
Eso es.
a mí siempre, este tipo siempre me ha parecido a mí un adelantado a su tiempo. Desde que lo conozco hace un montón de años, me pareció un tipo de quitarme el sombrero. Entonces, estoy convencido que si este tipo, además que no hay un equipo de matemáticas, no sé qué, pues lo hará. Y estoy convencido que a su nivel funcionará. Y que nos lo podemos traer aquí, ya te lo digo yo, ni de coña. O sea, esto no lo voy a ver ni de coña. Pues si ya hay un montón de, ya en clínicas privadas ya hay esta aplicación que te escucha y te hace la historia sola, pero esto es imposible que lo ponga nuestro sistema. Esto viola todas las cosas de, aparte que requiere una inversión, que para qué la va a hacer si ya estás tú, gratis. Eh, eh, Esto viola todos los tipos, todos eh, eh, los principios de la seguridad informática y la violabilidad de los datos del paciente y todo esto. Bueno, imposible, imposible,
Ese es
imposible. En
un
nuestro medio es
apunte
imposible.
importante.
Si lo puedes hacer con piedra y así, sílex y tal, pues muchísimo más seguro todo, muy bien. Entonces, que este tío lo va a hacer, estoy convencido, que llegará 10 años más tarde, si llega, yo qué sé. No sé, soy pesimista en esto, la verdad.
Esto era lo que yo intentaba decir al principio. Hay una serie de barreras que algunas son estructurales, culturales, diría yo casi, y otras son presupuestarias que generan unas dificultades más allá del concepto que vemos todos, de, oye, si podemos capturar un montón de datos, desde si come más o menos carne, si hace más o menos ejercicios, yo qué sé, si se lleva la mano a la cara más veces que son capaces de predecirnos que una enfermedad tan impredecible, como dijo en su primera diapositiva, nos pueda orientar sobre cuál va a ser el curso en el medio plazo, ideal. Pero es que hay cuestiones legales, de hardware, de software, de no sé qué. En Europa somos expertos en legislar y en atar los tapones a las botellas y para que así se nos derrame el agua encima. Mm, en fin, es que hay una serie de dificultades que, que yo soy, no pesimista, yo creo que no soy pesimista, soy realista.
Bueno. Bueno, prefiero quedarme con el espíritu positivo que nos ha dejado Charlie.
¿Recuerda a Luis
Y
Menchen?
bueno, yo prefiero quedarme con el subidón con el que se ha ido este hombre, que yo creo que es contagioso. Y quizás si nadie tiene más comentarios, a lo mejor podemos irnos a merendar, quizá.
Pues
Quizá
nada, a merendar.
Pablo,
Hasta la-
Patricia, JJ.
quizá podríamos hacer un pequeño recuerdo de la sesión del próximo día, que es el 4 de noviembre a las 4:30, que es especialmente interesante desde mi punto de vista: desafíos en el manejo en la enfermedad intestinal en Latinoamérica en 2025. Me parece bueno que hay gente que llega al mismo sitio que nosotros con menos, o a lo mejor no llega, o a lo mejor llegaría, y quizá merece mucho la pena escucharlo y comentarlo y reflexionar. Así que Guillermo Vieita, que es el presidente de Panco, y lo tenemos el 4 de noviembre. Y sin más, yo creo que podemos despedir, Dani.
Estupendo. Pues nada, hasta el próximo twist y muchas gracias a todos por vuestra asistencia.
Gracias a vosotros. Buena tarde.
Hasta pronto a todos.
Chao.
Adiós.